a lot of people try to make infinite banking a hack. They frame it like a financial hack. The crazy thing is if you don't treat it like a hack and you treat it with respect and treat it and you create it with purpose and balance, everything starts to feel like a hack 5 years later because you have so much control. You don't have to worry about anything. So it starts to feel like a hack.
Well, John, thank you for joining us on the Infinite Banking Initiative. And we want to hear your story of how you discovered the infinite banking concept.
I don't know if anyone remembers, but I had a whole 20-year career in high technology here in Silicon Valley. So I spent my first part of my career in tech. I started with a lot of, before it was called cloud, it used to be called application service provider. So I was doing cloud services before it was called the cloud. And then I spent a lot of time in data centers, which are specialized industrial real estate assets. So I was in data center real estate, finance, and consulting. And when I was working on those deals, these big institutional investors would come in and they'd be looking at a $20-50 million data center real estate asset. And I started noticing, and I was also taught by my mentor in that business, that they had different ideas about how they should use their money. And rate of return wasn't in the top two of what they were concerned about when buying these big data center real estate assets. What they were mostly concerned about was control and risk. Rate of return found its way in there through the risk component and cap rates, but really they were mostly concerned about having control of the asset and having it be a low risk opportunity. And so what kind of dawned on me at that time was that the people with big money that are coming in and buying these, really expensive assets, they looked at money a completely different way than what we're taught. We're taught, when I was young, everyone said, hey, you're young, so you can afford to take risk, right? And that kind of stuff. And it's like, so now you want to take high risk to get a high return in the stock market or your 401k or, whatever you were putting your money into. And, I don't know if you can tell, but I've been around a little bit. I was around during the dot-com bust, and I was around during the Great Recession. And, I saw everyone get hurt, including myself during those periods, being part of startups, I was one of the first people laid off in those big market corrections. And, I had to just go right back into my 401k and get money to live on. So I saw this like complete disconnect on what regular people are taught about money and, what I saw these big money people do. Also at the time, admittedly, I wasn't great with money. I spent a little too much. And, so there were some of those things where I'm like, it all kind of came together where I'm like, all right, I gotta figure out a way to, have control over my money, which is kind of what we always talk about in infinite banking. And so I was also kind of like a, amateur economist. I don't know. That's probably too generous of a term, but I was always, I was interested in Austrian economics. I kind of jumped on the Ron Paul train back in the day and, discovered all those things. I actually discovered a little bit before Ron Paul, and then Ron Paul came around and I was like, oh, this is great. So I was reading, Henry Hazlitt, and then, got into, the Mises Institute and reading all this stuff. So I was reading Robert Murphy. I was reading he wrote an article, and I can't remember the publication anymore, but he started talking about life insurance and mentioned the infinite banking concept. And I was like, oh, that sounds pretty interesting. So I bought Becoming Your Own Banker. This was probably in 2015, maybe something like that. 2014. I've had a policy for about 10 years. So I guess it was 2014, 2015. Started reading Becoming Your Own Banker, read several other books, reached out to an authorized practitioner, and I started my first policy. And what I learned during the time when I was just getting educated on IBC, what I saw was, hey, this is the thing that actually connects what I saw these big institutional investors doing and brought it down to the you and me level, as Bob Murphy used to say, with like what infinite banking is, banking at the you and me level. It brought corporate finance principles down to the level that a regular person can touch, and it completely changed everything. I mean, I really stopped worrying about um, what I'm going to invest in, where my money's going to go. I just started capitalizing, and lo and behold, so to make a long story short, how I got into the infinite banking, I had a crossroads in my tech career, and I was just kind of I was going to be making a decision to move on to the next thing, and I found myself, all I talked about was infinite banking at parties, and people, and to everyone's dismay. But I had found myself, I had become really passionate about it. I was already like running Excel models and figuring out how to do things, um, and I was like, maybe I should just get into the business. And so I know you guys know Todd Langford. I had purchased his Truth Concepts software before I was even in the business and messing around with it. I went to one of his truth trainings before I was even in the business. And then I just decided to do it. And so I jumped in with both feet. I was living in New York at the time, and became became a licensed insurance agent, got my practitioner certification, and there I was, and then I was doing it. And I spent 2 years in New York, and then I moved back here to California, where I've lived for about 25 years. So I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Well, you had forgotten that you lived in New York.
Yeah,
So you actually got licensed and contracted while in New York.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the gold standard, right?
Well, I don't know.
The toughest hurdles anyway.
It
Yeah.
is. Yeah. It's tough to do business there. I mean, we were still doing paper applications, and
Yeah.
but yeah, I have some great clients there, that really latched on to IBC, and and it's been great.
So, yeah, you talked about you saw that the definition and use of capital was it mimicked what these big investors did.
Yeah.
How can you expand on that a little bit without getting overly too technical?
Yeah. And so I didn't know this at the time, but I know it now. And when you have control, um, what these institutional investors know is if they have control of a high quality asset, meaning low risk, they can create multiple rates of return off of that single asset. And that's exactly what we do with IBC, but you have to have control and guarantees to do that. And so the classic infinite banking process would be, we capitalize a whole life insurance policy. We use a policy loan to acquire an asset, hopefully. As we pay off the policy loan, it frees up that capital all over again. And now we just go and buy our next asset. So, my company name is Stacked Life, which is kind of partially where that came from, where you're essentially reusing the same capital over and over and over and over again, creating a stack of assets that don't necessarily have to have a super high rate of return individually, but when you can buy multiple of them with the same money, essentially, it becomes a very, very powerful. And so you're almost getting like compounding on your compounding. And that's exactly what these big institutional investors do. They look for high quality assets, very low risk, because they're really more concerned about preserving rather than trying to get these massive growth rates. So that's kind of what connected it. And it's really changed everything. And so now, my whole business is focused on that.
Wow. Yes, that's good. Yeah, it kind of, so I'm thinking about just a cash, paying dividend whole life policy is kind of the same thing, all by itself. Kind of not an exaggerated huge rate of return, quote unquote, but a guaranteed uninterrupted compounded return all by itself. And if you can leverage it for what you're talking about, cash flowing assets, somebody uses that term all the time, then it really brings the use of capital to life. Yeah, good.
It absolutely does. Yeah, I love that. And, I really want to commend you, David, for you've really been steering the organization towards that idea over the last 3 or 4 years. And I think it's just been phenomenal how you've really stepped up the education on exactly what you just said at our think tanks. And I think that's a super important piece.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the compliment. But what we're trying to do is not just go down one single rabbit hole with IBC, because it's a multifaceted concept. And, a lot of people have traction with debt reduction. Well, that's good, but now you're involved in some of the human problems where you have a client who's got a spending problem, and IBC is not going to fix that. No. So, but it is very useful, and that's how Nelson, developed it. Obviously, when he identified the problem and becoming your own banker, it was based on, 34.5% of your, after-tax income going out to service loans. So just reuse that money back in your cash flow that you own and, like you said, control. But it's got so much more to it than that. So I'm glad we're talking about that today.
And you bring up an interesting point. This is like kind of a different subject, but you mentioned going down the rabbit hole of like a specific solution, and there's kind of two things around that. Number one, we do have a specific solution, and that's to strategically capitalize. What you do with that capital doesn't always necessarily have to be something we have to help people with. It can be, but it doesn't always have to be. But the other thing is just talking about some of the noise out there. A lot of people, try to take shots at IBC practitioners, as like IBC being like a sales system. But if you think about it, it actually, what we do is in a lot of ways harder than other things, because like you said, there's so many things you can do with IBC. I mean, I talk with people all the time where, they'll call me and they'll say, okay, well, now that this is in place, now what do I do? And it's kind of like, well, what do you want to do? And it actually, in some ways, makes that an even harder life insurance sale, because you're not finding a person that has a specific thing necessarily. You're finding someone who's open-minded to understanding the benefits of controlling their capital. And that's a lot of times a different sales process. So I think that's a good thing to note.
No, it is. It's not just about policy poops. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
It's controlling the banking function in your life, where your investment banking function, like you're talking about, or the debt reduction banking function, or building that capital base. For I talk about all the time is for future generational transfer and use. So yeah,
it follows you through your whole life. Whole life insurance. It's like it has all these things that it's doing for you right now, and then all these things that it's going to do for the people that you leave behind. I mean, it's providing benefits through the entire course of your life. It's really a pretty special asset and a special process.
Well, Nelson had a bunch of IBC isms, right? And one of them was don't be afraid to capitalize.
Yeah, that's right.
What does that mean to you? Don't be afraid to capitalize.
That one also probably in my mind has a lot of different uses, but I think I talk a lot about FOMO, fear of missing out. And, in the era of especially here in Silicon Valley, in the era of like, tech unicorns and crypto and all this other stuff. Not to mention, there's all these different real estate things you can get into now. I find people like just tripping over all over themselves to just invest, in the next thing that gets put in front of their face. And um, Nelson also talked about the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. And a lot of times when you have capital or when you have cash, opportunities have a way of finding you. And so one of the another challenge with IBC is sometimes you get these investors who just cannot get over this capitalization period of the whole life policy, where you're going to have less cash value than what you've paid in premiums for the first couple of years, first few years, whatever it is. Because they're just like, well, I could be investing with that. It's like, yeah, you could. And you would, if you directly invest for those few years, and you didn't do IBC, you would create an advantageous situation for yourself for those 3 or 4 years. What about the next 70 years? You know what I mean? And so not being afraid to capitalize it ties to thinking long range, where, hey, you know what? If you focus on capitalization, even if you miss out on a couple opportunities that are in front of you right now, I guarantee you something even better will come along. And I know it's true because it happened for me. The only reason I was able to change careers from tech into a completely different field was because I had a bunch of money saved up in my whole life insurance policies and a couple other places, but I had a bunch of money saved up. What's the rate of return on changing into a career that I've never been more, professionally fulfilled? I mean, my personal life, I'm fulfilled there. I'm making more money than I ever did in tech. And it's like, how can I put a rate of return on happiness, and fulfillment? And a lot of people they're just like so focused on some percentage that they don't take time to build the structure they need to make everything work so much easier.
So that's good. I call that the intrinsic value
Mm-hmm.
of IBC. But so when you talk about the structure of
Yeah.
IBC, what does that mean?
Well, it's for people, that a lot of times they put the cart before the horse, like they're just so focused on sending their money out to different investments that if one thing goes wrong, the whole thing blows up anyway. I mean, here's a perfect example. It happened to me, in the late 90s, early 2000s. I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was following the advice and putting a good chunk of that into a 401k. And then in 2000, when the dot-com bubble burst, I was laid off, and I just went right into my 401k, liquidated it, paid the penalties and taxes. And so I didn't have a structure set up that was meant for me, right? It was like, because I didn't have any access or control over the money that I sent into that 401k. I didn't, I mean, you kind of know the rules, but you don't really think of the consequences of those rules. Like at 24 years old, that money's locked away for the next 40 years, like why would we do this? So, it's, it's the structure to me means, I just recorded a podcast about this. When you build a house, we don't build a house just to build a house. We build a house so that we can enjoy it, so we can sit in the living room with our friends, and or on Christmas and open presents, or sit by maybe some people have a pool, or enjoy the landscaping that we did. That's why you do it. But if you start with those things, the things that are enjoyable, the things that give you pleasure, if you start with the landscaping and then you need to pour the foundation, all the trucks and workers are going to come in and just trample your landscaping anyway when you have to come and pour the foundation. So it's like people would do themselves just a huge favor if they just took some time to, put things in the right order and go step by step. But everyone just gets that FOMO, and and by the way, it happens for people that make $60,000 a year, and it happens for people that make $600,000 a year. I mean, I talk to these, tech people. They're making, really good salaries, and they're basically living check to check. They have almost nothing, other than their stuff that they can't get to without paying taxes and penalties or getting permission from a bank to get a line of credit on it or anything. They have no control, and they really don't have a great structure in place. There's kind of like, I mean, I see so many people just waiting for their stock options to take off via like an IPO or an acquisition. And so like that value is just sitting there, and they're just waiting for that to do anything. Some of them get lucky, but most of them don't. And it's a problem.
Yes, that's good structure. So yeah, I didn't know if you're going to go down the policy design.
I have a straight whole life policy with no PUA or anything. I mean, it's like, to me, the policy structure is, it's more noise, I mean, I, I think, I guess it's not noise when you're trying to help people understand, like, some of those really aggressive cash value designs can blow up. So I don't think it's noise to help people understand that's a risk they're taking when they do that. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like there's so many, it depends on what the client needs. Unfortunately, the client always thinks they need more cash value. So you really have to explain the trade-offs and make sure they understand like what's going to happen there. I'll explain the trade-offs, and people will be like, well, I'm doing this, so I know I need really high cash value. It's like, yeah, of course, everyone says that. So, but here's what can happen. And I can tell you just from my practice personally, when I explain the trade-offs, no one wants high cash value. I think the Nelson Nash Institute has done a really good job of having a really good focus on education around some of those things, because it is it's a little bit of a problem. Like, they say they do infinite banking. They're not associated with the Nelson Nash Institute at all. A lot of times they haven't even read the book. They just say, it's like their manager and their agency told them about infinite banking and coached them on talking to clients about how they can do infinite banking. And then it's just like a really super high cash value design that's easier to sell because it looks like free insurance. It's like, oh, well, if you can pay 10,000 in premium and get 9,000 right back out to, go spend somewhere, did you even buy insurance? Like, did you even pay? So it's a super dangerous thing. There's no free lunch. That's just economics 101. My economics high school teacher, Mr. Evans, no free lunch in room 117. And so the thing is, like, I've modeled a lot of this stuff. So by the way, I'm not good at Excel, but I use it a lot. It's like I do everything the hard way because I don't know the formulas or anything, but I get it done. And if you have what I would call a reasonably balanced policy design with a reasonable PUA rider, maybe a term rider, not always, you can create a way bigger policy from a cash value perspective than you can with these super high early policy designs. There's just no question. It's like, it's right there. The math is there. And so I just share that with people when they, get hung up on them. Some of them can't see, some of them have their blinders on and just can't get past it. And so I usually don't work with those people. And, but some people that once they're more reasonable at it, when they see the trade-offs, it's like, oh yeah, that doesn't make sense at all. So.
Yeah, good. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that. Sometimes I bring it up too many times, but I just want to help people. I'm not trying to make, so.
It's a hot topic, and it's definitely something that I deal with all the time. Unfortunately, there's a lot of these people that talk about it and position it. It's like, again, kind of going back to the people who take shots at whole life agents. They'll say that whole life agents get a bigger commission And then, but on the other side of that, it's like the people that, sell cheap term insurance and the people that sell high PUA, those are actually easier to sell. So those are the people that that are actually trying to, make a commission. We're the ones trying to help people understand the strategy. That's the core thing of what we're doing. And that's not as easy to do all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, that is perfect. IBC is not about policy design. IBC is implementing the strategies that you want to implement, and then as you reverse engineer the policy to do it. But yeah, that's a great insight. You know, I appreciate that because it's something we continually find about. And anybody who doesn't know what IBC is about, okay, we're talking about control of your cash flow by using a cash value dividend paying whole life insurance policy parentheses policies. Okay, it's not about anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. I might even say that, um, I don't even think we need to reverse engineer anything. I think you implement IBC for the best way that it can be implemented for your situation at the time, and then everything will just flow naturally from that. I think it's like a lot of people, something that's kind of prominent now is like, you'll have groups that they sell whole life and sometimes even do IBC, and then they have other investments that they do. They have like a club that you can kind of get into, and so they kind of do that where they design the policy, and a lot of times it's high PUA, and they're like, hey, look, you can borrow this right back out and then invest in our stuff. And I don't know, like for me, it's kind of like, well, is that stuff going to be around in 5 years, 10 years? Is it going to be around in 2 years? It's like, my personal opinion as IBC practitioners, I think we should focus on helping people learn how to create their own system of capital, become their own banker. And like all the other stuff can come after that. I'm not knocking people who have those things. I have those things too, but I don't make it part. I don't combine them. And that may not even be right. Maybe I should, I don't know, but I just think that if I focus on people helping implement IBC, and then if they want to talk about the other stuff that I do, they can. But I know right from the get-go they've got a solid um, IBC implementation that's based on where they're at right now.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you clarified that for me. I apologize for that, but you know, uh, when I think about the problem out there with the message, okay, and the sensationalism of the IBC message, and the policy designs and whatnot, I think, and what I see when I have personal conversations with the public or even with agents, they go to the becoming your own banker equipment financing illustrations, and they go, "Oh, look, I can only have to pay for 7 years." And then I'm gonna, and then I say no. Nelson reverse engineered that policy to mimic a conventional finance package. So so that's what he did, and that's not what you need to do, because those that base premium is being paid for the life of the policy if you understand what the book says. So hopefully I'm not muddying the water too much, but becoming your own banker, it's got it all. Okay. You have to understand what it's about. That's all there is to it.
Absolutely. And we can't knock people for not understanding that. It's like they're looking at the thing in the book. And so, I don't know. I think it gives us something to talk with them about. I think it's a good thing. I don't think, some book is supposed to have every answer for people. It's a starting point. And then hopefully, we as infinite banking practitioners, hopefully we've um, done the work and taken the time and, gotten the experience to help them on the, next part of their journey, to doing that.
Can you share a little bit about some of the ways that IBC has impacted your clients' lives?
I've been doing this for 7 years now, going on 8 years. I've been practicing IBC personally for over 10 years. My clients are, a lot of them are like just coming out of the capitalization period, right? And so they're now the ones that are still doing it. Well, pretty much all of them are. You of course had the few that stop, but um, at this point, it's now dawning on them. They're like, wait a minute. So I just paid a whatever $10,000 premium, and my cash value grew by $12,000. Like that's crazy. And so they're now starting to really figure it out. The early years, let's be honest, they kind of suck. They're boring. You don't have as much, it's true. You don't have as much money as you paid into it. And, it's like, oh man, I can understand why, people sometimes, they're kind of like, am I doing the right thing here? And, you know, you are, and now the ones that stuck it out are like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. So, um, I don't know that I have anything like crazy that anybody has done, but what I do have is I have people that are coming back and saying, "Man, I had no idea how much I could capitalize. Now that I'm doing this, like I'm finding money that I can just keep doing that. Like I could have gone like I could have had a policy twice as large had I really understood like what this was going to do for me. But we're kind of in a little bit of volatility right now, and I have seen like I just did a client only workshop, and I've gotten a few calls recently where people have had layoffs, and things aren't going as well as they'd hoped. And I think one big, in my mind, success story, because I've struggled with it for the first half of my career through two market corrections, is people are finding that they've got all this flexibility and they're sitting on a bunch of cash. So they're like in such a good position compared to what they would have been if they had just been dumping all that into a 401k or whatever it is, real estate or any, whatever. Again, not knocking real estate. I'm not even really knocking 401ks. I guess I kind of am. I really am not a fan of 401ks, but, obviously we want to build income and do all that stuff. So, not knocking that, but what's happening now is people are like, hey, my cash flow has been a little affected. I'm like, okay, well, we structured this policy so that you can reduce your premium. And that's usually the PUA. That's optional, the paid up additions component. Let's just take that off for the time being. And they're like, well, is that going to affect the growth of the policy? And if they're like past 5 years, I say, no, it won't, because actually the base premium is doing more for you than the PUA rider is at this point. It will affect it because it's just less premium, but it's not a bad thing. And having the flexibility to adjust based on what's happening right now, it's really not exciting, but to me it is. Like the fact that people can roll with the punches, which happens so much more frequently than people like acknowledge. That is such a huge thing to me, where people aren't, sacrificing their future growth just so they can live today. I read a statistic somewhere. It was like based off Fed data. I can't cite it, so take it for what it's worth. But there was some Fed data that showed in 2023, 90% of retirees, first-time retirees, had less than $1 million saved. And so I know that's an arbitrary number, but I was thinking about it and I was like, okay, well, if someone maxed out their 401k for 35 years, what kind of rate of return would they need to get $1 million? And it's like 3%. So there's two things that are not what we think they are. Number one, it's either the average rate of return that we're all told you're going to get, which is like 10% or what, it goes from 8 to 12, depending on who you're talking to. Either that's not true, or people are not able to keep their money in their 401k and they're actually spending that money all along the way because they've unknowingly gave up control of their capital. And so when something happened, they had to either stop contributing or even pull money out. And so they're ending up with, less than $1 million, which that is not going to be a whole lot to live on for a 65-year-old or where, whatever. I mean, I don't really like the idea of retirement anyway, but I'm just saying there's so much that happens that is about control that people are just ending up in a bad position. The people that are retiring right now, they're kind of like the first generation of the 401k people. 401k has been around, since the 80s. So these are the first batch of people. We're seeing the results of it, and it's not looking good. And it's because they've given up control. So that's the number one thing.
It's a sad story, unfortunately, but that's the only story that the public hears. That's the only, quote unquote, they're being taken care of. The government's helping them and provided them a guaranteed retirement when they're in a lower tax bracket, quote unquote.
Yeah, they shifted from defined benefit to where you knew what you were going to get to defined contribution, where that's the only thing you know is how much you put in. And a lot of times you don't even know that. So, and obviously we're on an infinite banking podcast, but, something I think people should understand, even if you don't want to do IBC, owning some whole life insurance can make all of those decisions you've already made work a lot better, where you can create some way better outcomes on a guaranteed basis and even live on more income because of the guarantees of whole life insurance. So I think, just to throw that out there, if anyone's listening, like, even if you don't want to do IBC, like, put some certainty into your life with something with actuarial power, so to speak, where you've got, whole life insurance or annuities, that solves a lot of problems for people.
Let's shift topics a little bit. Did you ever have the opportunity to meet Nelson?
I did. So I have two, what I think are pretty cool stories about meeting Nelson. So as I mentioned, I was kind of, amateur economist, or I guess just interested. I mean, I know a couple things, but I know Ryan Griggs or anything, but I was interested, and I was, just read tons of stuff from the Mises Institute, Austrian economics, and had been listening to Bob Murphy for years. And when I applied to become an authorized infinite banking practitioner, you guys had me on an interview, and so I hop on this Zoom, and it's David, Nelson, Carlos, and Bob, and all four of you that I'd just been reading and kind of watching for years, and now I'm finally like sitting on a Zoom with all of you at the same time for this interview, and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And so that was a cool moment. But the really cool moment for Nelson specifically was at my first think tank, where I didn't know anyone. I'm just kind of attending all this stuff, and it was like in between a session, so people were kind of starting to filter in, and I just sat down at a spot, not thinking anything about it, and I look over to my left, and Nelson just sits right down next to me, and I was like, oh wow. So we just kind of said hi and exchanged a couple formalities, and he sat next to me the whole time, and I just got to thank him at the end of that session and for everything he'd done. Got a quick picture with him. So yeah, that was. I don't have as long of a relationship as a lot of people in the group, but it was pretty special.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. Thinking back to when you started, what do you wish you would have known then about infinite banking?
That's a good question. You didn't have that in your list of questions. I think so. We've, even on this podcast, we've spent some time, talking about like policy structure and all that stuff. I do think it's important to recognize that I think everyone kind of goes through that phase. It's hard to not go through that phase because you don't know any better. You're not an expert yet. And on the surface, it seems proper. So I think a lot of the new people coming in right now, they have a nice advantage because we've been spending so much time making sure that people understand this, that they're not kind of falling for that, or they're not misunderstanding the reality of and the trade offs of doing that. So I was the same way when I first came in. I would look at. So I have a client. He's still a client. He bought two policies, but one of them he wanted the highest early cash value and the highest rate of return on the cash value. And with the carrier that I wrote the policy with, the best way to do that is to do what's called a short pay. So we did a 5 pay, loaded up all the PUA in the front, and then it was designed to. I don't want to get too technical for regular people listening, but you do a premium offset for a couple of years, and then you reduce pay up in year 7 or in year 8. And so that was, I wish I had known more about the mechanics of the whole life and the really significant trade-offs of pushing all of that value to the front. Because what ended up happening 5 years later, and let me say one more thing. He just maxed the policy loans out every year. And so it was just like he would pay a premium, max policy loan. So the policy just had nothing in it essentially to create any value other than the premium payment. But once we stopped the premium payments and tried to offset the premium, he just didn't have enough value in the policy to do what we were originally intending to do. So it was like kind of a newbie mistake on my part. It wasn't a big deal. We could have fixed it, but he just didn't want to. So he let the policy go. And so it became a big deal because now that's one less policy that I think he could have had that, if he would have paid even just one more premium, it would have, gone the way he thought. So what that means is we really have to understand what the trade-offs are that we're implementing. Because everything's a trade-off with insurance, right? Everything's a trade-off between cost and risk. So you can't do one thing over here without having some kind of corresponding trade-off. It's an insurance policy, not an account. It's not, an investment. So those are just some of the things that I didn't fully understand at the time. Luckily, I knew enough that it wasn't a huge deal. He could have fixed it for very little, but he just didn't want to. So anyway, some of those things, and those are just things you learn on the job. And unfortunately, no one that I was working with at that time, waved me off of it. You know what I mean? So, there are people that have been in the business for decades that didn't bother to let me know what those trade-offs are. So again, just to toot the Nelson Nash Institute's horn a little bit, we've got this organization where it's built around the principles of IBC and why we're doing IBC, not around selling the next policy. And that's why I get a little annoyed. Like I've gotten into some pretty funny, forum battles on like real estate forums and stuff like that. People take shots. I'm like, okay, here we go. So, that's the thing is like, yeah, we sell life insurance, but like we have some principles behind what we're doing. And I wasn't like talking with anybody at the Nelson Nash Institute at that time, in terms of like policy design. And my agency at that time, they all saw it and none of them, tried to correct me. So we've got a great group here where, if you go through the mentorship program, you've got some good people that understand the principles and it's really going to help, especially new advisors not, step their foot in some of those potholes that can happen out there. Luckily, whole life is so awesome that it's not hard to fix problems if you don't do something, completely correct. It's just that sometimes people forget. I call it IBC amnesia. I don't know if I got that from you guys or whatever, but people forget what they're doing sometimes. They forget why. And so, my client at that time started just looking at this like an investment. He's like, why would I put more money into this investment? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it was too late. Like he'd already forgotten. So anyway, that's a little cautionary tale and something that I wish I had known a little bit better when I first started.
So you said he's still your client?
Yeah, he had acquired 2 policies. Luckily, I was able to talk to him about, hey, let's do one policy where you pay a premium for a long time, and this will be sort of your long-term policy. So he was cool with that too. So it's still good. Another one, I don't know if you want another one real quick, but it's hard to know better because when a lot of people think the PUA is really what does everything, and something I wish I knew a little bit better when I first started was that the PUA is really just for the first few years. Like after year 5, call it, the base premium actually starts doing more heavy lifting than the PUA rider. And so it kind of goes back to the policy design stuff where if you're just front loading the PUA where you create a scenario where you can only do like a 5 pay or you have to pay up the policy, you just kind of chop the thing off, at the legs. And at a point where that base PUA was really going to start cranking on all cylinders. So I know those are both a little bit centered around policy design, but like, because I was so into Austrian economics and I was already pretty educated on what we were doing, like from a principle standpoint, I didn't really need any help on that side. For me, it was just learning the business because I wasn't in the business. So, some people are already in the business and they have to learn the principles of IBC. I already understood that because I just already been kind of living it. But I had to learn the business side, the insurance side.
That's a good point. Yeah. That's why the mentor program is so important to help you steer clear of those pitfalls. But don't feel like the Lone Ranger. I own a 10 pay.
Oh yeah, totally.
It's been paid up for over 20 years. Guess who it's on?
Nelson?
You're host of the podcast.
Okay, great. Yeah, see?
Lead bargain here. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm one of the ones in the family that has one. So,
and I asked the agent of record, why is it a 10 pay? And he was like, oh, don't worry about it. move on. Got it. Okay.
Hey, I'm not, 10 pays aren't always bad. I mean, if you have a specific thing you're trying to do, but if we're,
it provides another opportunity to buy another policy. That's all.
That's right. No, that's funny. But, just all my policies they're all paid up at age 100. They go forever. So it's good.
Yep. Like you said, the further they're out, the more opportunity you have to capitalize.
Well, John, thank you again for spending time with us and for sharing a little bit about your story. And I think you bring a really unique perspective to the infinite banking concept. And we would just like to ask you as we close, what does the infinite banking concept mean to you?
The infinite banking concept means to me control. And at the end of the day, it's like a peaceful existence. You know what I mean? And that comes from control. Like, not to go on too long of a tirade as we close, but a lot of people try to make infinite banking a hack. They frame it like a financial hack. And the crazy thing is if you don't treat it like a hack and you treat it with respect and treat it and you create it with purpose and balance, everything starts to feel like a hack 5 years later because you have so much control. You don't have to worry about anything. So it starts to feel like a hack, but people skip the structure part and the capitalization part, and they try to go right to the hack part. And that's the only time you can really have a problem. So for me, it's just like kind of being in control and living a great life. I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's kind of the result. But I'll say one more thing. It's also about the community, so we go to the think tank every year. I'm starting to see familiar faces, haven't been around for a little bit now. And so, having a central place where we can really promote this idea and this process, I think is huge. So thanks to you guys.
Well, thank you for your support. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Absolutely.